Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, I will share the story of how Thanksgiving began. It is a tale of brave people, dangerous journeys, and a friendship that saved lives. The story begins in England, over 400 years ago, in the early 1600s. At that time, King James I ruled the country. He was intelligent but very strict. He believed God had chosen him to be king, giving him complete authority over laws, government, and even the church. King James controlled the Church of England. Every person in the country was required to attend its services and worship in the same way. However, some people strongly disagreed. They felt the church had become too wealthy and elaborate. They wanted simple worship based only on the Bible, without grand ceremonies or special priests. These people were known as separatists because they wished to separate from the Church of England. King James hated that idea. He thought that if people could choose their religion, they might question his power. So he made strict laws. If you didn't attend the Church of England, you could be arrested, lose your job or home, be sent to prison, or even killed for your beliefs. A group of separatists lived in a small village called Scrooby, in northern England. They met secretly in homes to worship in their own way, always fearing soldiers who hunted those breaking church laws. Life soon became far too dangerous. The group's leader was William Brewster, a well-educated and courageous man. He gathered everyone and declared, "We cannot remain here. We must find a place where we can worship freely." So they decided to leave England for Holland, a country known for its religious freedom. In 1608, they settled in the city of Leiden. First, they were happy. They could worship openly and without fear. But after 11 years, new problems appeared. They worked hard but stayed poor. Their children were growing up Dutch, speaking a different language and forgetting English customs. And Holland might soon go to war with Spain. The separatists held another meeting to decide their future. Some wanted to stay in Holland. Many others dreamed of going farther, to America. There, they could build their own community, worship freely, preserve their English identity, own land, and secure a better future for their children. America was a terrifying choice. It was extremely far away. Many died during the voyage. Even more perished after arrival. The land was filled with wild animals and Native Americans, whose intentions were unknown. Winters were brutal, and forests were dense and dark. Despite these dangers, the separatists chose to go. They were willing to risk everything for freedom and hope. Planning the journey took a long time. They needed money, a ship, supplies, and permission from the king to establish a colony. A group of London businessmen agreed to finance the trip. In exchange, the separatists would work for 7 years, sending back valuable goods like fish, furs, and lumber. After 7 years, they would own their land and be free. The group purchased a small ship called the Speedwell. However, not everyone from Leiden could join the voyage. There was not enough money or space. Difficult choices had to be made. Families were torn apart as some decided to risk the journey while others stayed behind, hoping to follow later. There were tearful goodbyes. On July 22, 1620, the Speedwell set sail from Holland. In England, the Speedwell met a larger ship, the Mayflower. Additional passengers boarded there. Not all were separatists. Some were workers hired by the businessmen. Others were families seeking land and opportunity, servants, or adventurers eager to explore the new world. In total, 102 passengers prepared to cross the ocean. About half were separatists, later known as pilgrims. The other half were ordinary English people looking for a better life. Problems began almost immediately. On August 5, 1620, both ships departed England. But soon, the speedwell began leaking. Water seeped through the wooden boards. The crew pumped it out, but more kept coming in. They were forced to turn back. After repairs, they tried again. The speedwell leaked once more. It was clearly not safe for the Atlantic crossing. They had no choice but to abandon it. Now all 102 passengers had to crowd onto the Mayflower alone. The ship was only about 100 feet long, roughly the length of 3 school buses. Imagine 102 people living in such a small space for 2 months. Some passengers gave up and returned home. Most pressed on. They squeezed in with their belongings, animals, supplies, tools, and furniture. There was hardly any room to move. Finally, on September 6, 1620, the Mayflower sailed from England for the last time. The passengers stood on deck, watching their homeland disappear. Many cried. They were leaving behind their country, relatives, friends, and familiar lives. They were heading into the complete unknown. Life on the ship. The voyage across the Atlantic was expected to last about 2 months. For 102 people, this meant enduring terrible conditions on a small wooden ship. Passengers were not allowed on deck, which was reserved for the sailors' work. Everyone had to stay below deck in a dark, crowded area. The ceiling was so low that tall men could not stand upright. They had to stoop or sit constantly. Each family was given a tiny space, perhaps 8 feet by 5 feet, smaller than a modern bathroom. A family of 5 or 6 would eat, sleep, and live in this area for the entire journey. There was no privacy. Everyone could hear everything. Crying babies, arguments, illness, and prayers. There were no proper bathrooms. People used buckets. The smell was awful. There was no way to bathe or wash clothes. Everyone became dirty and foul-smelling. Lice and fleas infested the space, biting people and causing constant itching. Food was basic and unappetizing. They had heavily salted meat and fish to preserve them. Hardtack bread was so tough it could break teeth. There were dried beans and peas, some cheese, and beer for drinking. Water spoiled quickly on long voyages, so everyone, including children, drank beer. In the beginning, some cooking was possible using a special firebox. But once storms hit, cooking stopped. Fire on a wooden ship was too dangerous. People ate cold food only. Many were too sick to eat at all. The storms. The first few weeks brought relatively calm weather. The ocean was manageable, and hope grew that the journey might not be too terrible. Then the storms arrived. The autumn Atlantic is notoriously dangerous, with massive storms sweeping across the water. The Mayflower was just a small wooden vessel, powerless against the ocean's fury. Waves rose as high as houses and crashed over the ship repeatedly. Water poured through every crack. Everything below deck became soaked. Clothes, bedding, food, and people. The ship pitched violently up and down, side to side. No one could stand or walk. They could only hold on tightly and pray. The wind howled like a beast and ripped at the sails. The sailors lowered the sails to prevent them from tearing apart. Without sails, the ship simply drifted, pushed by waves and wind. Nearly everyone suffered from seasickness. They vomited constantly. The stench made others sick too. Children cried for their mothers, and mothers cried for their children. Fear gripped everyone. Many believed they would die at sea. Storms raged for days at a time. Sometimes a week passed with relentless wind, rain, and waves. Brief periods of calm might follow, only for another storm to strike. One storm was especially devastating. A massive wave struck the ship with such force that it cracked a main beam, a thick piece of wood holding the vessel together. Everyone heard the terrifying crack. They saw the beam split. This was catastrophic. If the beam broke fully, the ship would fall apart, and all would drown in the freezing ocean, far from any land or help. But the passengers had brought a large iron screw, originally for printing books. The ship's carpenter, whose name is unknown, used the screw to force the beam back into place. He and the sailors then spent hours reinforcing it with posts and braces. The ship held together. Everyone knew how close they had come to disaster. They prayed more fervently, held their children closer, and wondered if they would ever see land again. Life and death at sea. During the voyage, one passenger died. He was a young sailor named William Button, hired to help with the ship. He fell ill and passed away just before reaching land. His body was wrapped in cloth, prayers were said, and he was lowered into the ocean. The waves took him. His family in England would never learn his fate. Yet there was also new life. Elizabeth Hopkins was pregnant when the journey began. Amid the storms, in the dark, crowded, wet space below deck, she went into labor. Miraculously, both mother and baby survived. They named the boy Oceanus Hopkins because he was born on the ocean. Another woman, Susanna White, gave birth to a son named Peregrine, meaning pilgrim or traveler. These births brought hope to everyone during the hardest moments. Land at last. After 66 grueling days at sea, on November 9th, 1620, a cry rang out, "Land! I see land!" Everyone who could move rushed to the deck. In the distance lay the coast of America, with dark green forests stretching down to sandy beaches. After 2 months of nothing but water, the sight of land brought tears of joy and relief. But joy quickly mixed with concern. They had intended to land in Virginia, where they had the king's permission to settle. The storms had blown them far north to Cape Cod, in what is now Massachusetts. This area was outside their legal grant. Should they sail south to Virginia? It was November. Winter was approaching. The weather was turning colder. Food and water were low. Everyone was sick and weak. Attempting to sail further and facing more storms could mean death. They decided to stay, but this created another serious problem. Since they were outside Virginia, the rules and government plans they had prepared no longer applied. Some non-pilgrim passengers declared, "We don't have to follow your rules now. We can do whatever we want." The leaders recognized the danger. Without unity and cooperation, the small group would not survive. So, before anyone left the ship, they drafted a document called the Mayflower Compact. 41 men signed it. They agreed to work together for the good of all. They promised to create and obey fair laws, choose their own leaders, and help one another survive. The Mayflower Compact was a landmark in American history. It was one of the first instances of people in America agreeing to govern themselves democratically. This idea of self-government would later play a key role in forming the United States. Part 3. The First Winter, November 1620 to March 1621. Searching for home. The Mayflower anchored off Cape Cod, but the Pilgrims needed to find the right place to build their settlement. They required fresh water, fertile soil for farming, a safe harbor for ships, and a location that could be defended. Groups of men set out on exploration trips. They rowed a small boat to shore and walked for miles through forests and along beaches. The weather was freezing. Snow began to fall. They trudged through it in wet boots with very little food. These expeditions were risky. They had no idea if Native Americans might attack. They were unfamiliar with the wild animals in the forests. Every unusual sound or shadow filled them with alarm. During one trip, they discovered something vital: corn buried in the ground. Native Americans had stored it for winter. The Pilgrims took this corn because they desperately needed food to survive. They later repaid the owners, but at the time, they had no other option. They also came across empty Native American villages. Houses stood abandoned, and bones lay scattered. The scene was haunting and sad. They did not yet understand what had happened. Later, they learned that European diseases, likely smallpox, had swept through the area years earlier. Native Americans had no immunity, and entire villages had been wiped out. After several weeks of searching, they found an ideal location. There was a hill for defense, a clear stream for fresh water, and some land already cleared from previous native farming. The harbor was suitable for ships. The native name for the place was Patuxet. The Pilgrims called it Plymouth. On December 21st, 1620, they began landing there to make it their new home. Building in the cold. The Pilgrims needed shelter immediately. Winter had fully arrived. Snow fell steadily. Ice formed on the stream. The wind cut through their clothing like a blade. Yet they had no houses. Their plan was to build a large common house first, where everyone could sleep. Then they would construct individual family homes. But building took time, and winter waited for no one. Every day, men rowed from the anchored Mayflower to the shore. They cut down trees, sawed wood into boards, built frames, and thatched roofs with bundled grass and reeds. Their hands grew so cold they could barely grip tools. Frostbite set in. Their faces became red and raw from the wind. Building was slow and exhausting. They also had to find food, gather firewood to stay warm, and fetch water. There were not enough hours in the day, and there were not enough healthy men to do everything. The women and children remained on the Mayflower, trying to cook, clean, and care for the sick, but conditions on the ship were dreadful. It was cold and damp. Water leaked through the boards. Everyone stayed wet and freezing. The sickness. Then illness struck. It spread rapidly through the ship like wildfire. People developed severe coughs, high fevers, and difficulty breathing. Some had pneumonia. Others suffered from scurvy due to the lack of fresh fruits and vegetables. Scurvy caused bleeding gums, loose teeth, extreme weakness, easy bruising, and eventually death without treatment. The sickness hit one person, then two, then 5, then 10. On the worst days, only 6 or 7 people were well enough to work. The rest were bedridden. The healthy ones had to care for the sick, continue building houses, search for food, haul water, and keep fires burning. They were utterly exhausted. Deaths began. First one, then another, then two more. Some days saw 3 burials. The survivors dug graves in the frozen ground using pickaxes and shovels. Their tears froze on their faces. Every family lost loved ones. Children became orphans. Parents lost children. Husbands lost wives. And wives lost husbands. William Bradford, who would later become governor, lost his wife Dorothy. She fell, or possibly jumped, overboard into the icy harbor water and drowned. Some believe despair drove her to it. From 102 passengers, only 52 survived the winter, for entire families were completely wiped out. Many children were left without parents. The dead were buried on a hill overlooking the harbor. The survivors planted grass over the graves and flattened them. They used no markers. They wanted to hide from Native Americans how many had died and how weak they had become. They feared an attack if their vulnerability was known. This was the darkest and most sorrowful period. Many wanted to give up. Some talked of returning to England. When spring arrived and the Mayflower prepared to sail back, Captain Jones offered to take anyone who wished to leave. Remarkably, no one accepted. They had come too far. They had sacrificed too much. They had buried too many loved ones in this new land. They would stay and fight to survive or die trying. Part 4. Meeting the Native Americans, March-April 1621. Samoset's surprise. In March 1621, after the horrific winter, an astonishing event occurred. One Friday afternoon, a Native American man walked boldly into Plymouth. He strolled right down the main street between the houses. The pilgrims panicked. They grabbed their guns and called for help. Who was this man? Did he mean harm? Were more warriors coming? But he was alone. He raised his hand in a gesture of peace. Then, to everyone's utter amazement, he spoke in English, "Welcome, welcome, Englishmen." The pilgrims could hardly believe it. A Native American speaking their language. His name was Samoset. He belonged to the Abenaki tribe from the coast of Maine, far to the north. He had learned some English from fishermen who came from England to catch cod. His English was not perfect, but he could communicate clearly. Samoset stayed with the pilgrims that day and night. He shared information about the region. He explained that they were on the land of the Wampanoag tribe and that the local leader was named Massasoit. He answered their questions about the land, animals, plants, and neighboring tribes. The pilgrims provided him with food, a place to sleep, and a coat since the night was cold. In the morning, Samoset left but promised to return. Enter Squanto. A few days later, on March 22nd, Samoset came back. This time, he brought several other Native Americans, including one named Tisquantum, known as Squanto. Squanto spoke English even better than Samoset. His story was both extraordinary and heartbreaking. Squanto was born in Patuxet, the exact place where the Pilgrims had built Plymouth. As a young man in 1614, he was kidnapped by an English explorer named Thomas Hunt. Hunt took about 20 Native Americans, including Squanto, to sell as slaves in Spain. In Spain, monks rescued Squanto from slavery. He lived with them for a time, learning about their world. Eventually, he traveled to England. In London, He stayed with a man who owned a shipyard. There, he learned English customs, and ship work. Finally, in 1619, Squanto sailed back to America with another English explorer. After 5 years away, he returned to his homeland of Patuxet. But upon arrival, his heart shattered. Everyone was dead. His entire village and much of his tribe had been killed by a disease, likely smallpox, a few years earlier. Coastal tribes had been devastated. Squanto was the only survivor of Patuxet. He was utterly alone. Now, English settlers lived in his village, on his people's land, building houses where his family's homes once stood. One can only imagine his grief, anger, confusion, and loneliness. Yet Squanto did not attack or seek revenge. Instead, he chose to help the pilgrims. Why? Perhaps he was lonely and longed for community. Maybe he believed aiding the English would gain him respect among other tribes. Or perhaps he was simply a kind and forgiving person. Likely, it was a combination of these reasons. Whatever his motives, Squanto became the pilgrims' greatest ally and friend. Squanto's lessons. Squanto moved into Plymouth and lived among the pilgrims. He taught them new skills every day. Without his knowledge, they almost certainly would have perished. First, he taught them how to fish. The streams and ocean teemed with fish, far more than the pilgrims had ever seen. But they did not know how to catch them effectively. Squanto showed them how to build weirs, traps made of sticks and stones. He demonstrated catching eels with bare hands. These eels were slippery and odd-looking but tasty and nutritious. He taught them the best places and times to fish. Suddenly, food was plentiful. Most importantly, Squanto taught them how to plant corn. The pilgrims had never seen this crop. In England, they grew wheat and barley. Corn was a Native American plant, unknown in Europe. Their attempts to plant English seeds had largely failed in the American soil and climate. Squanto explained the native method. Wait until oak leaves are the size of a mouse's ear, signaling warm enough soil. Then form small mounds of earth in rows. In each mound, bury 2 or 3 small fish called aloes. As the fish decomposed, they fertilized the soil. Plant the corn seeds on top. The pilgrims thought burying fish sounded strange, but they trusted Squanto and followed his instructions. It worked perfectly. The corn grew tall and strong. The fish provided essential nutrients. This technique made the difference between starvation and survival. Squanto taught many other skills. He showed them which wild plants were safe to eat and which were poisonous. He demonstrated making traps for beavers and rabbits. He explained how to tap maple trees for sweet sap. He taught tracking deer through the forest and locating berries and nuts. All of this knowledge came from thousands of years of Native American experience. The pilgrims were beginners in this new land. Squanto became their teacher, guide, and friend. Governor Bradford later wrote that Squanto was a special instrument sent of God for their good. Meeting Massasoit. Squanto also acted as translator and diplomat between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag tribe. The Wampanoag leader, Massasoit, was curious about the English settlers. He wanted to determine if they were friends or foes. In March 1621, Massasoit visited Plymouth. He did not come alone, he brought 60 warriors. The Pilgrims, with perhaps only 20 healthy men, were terrified. If Massasoit wanted war, they could not defend themselves. But Massasoit came in peace. He wished to negotiate a treaty. With Squanto translating, Massasoit and Governor John Carver agreed on 6 key points, and neither side would harm the other. Anyone breaking this rule would be punished. The stolen items must be returned. If one side went to war with another tribe, the other would help as an ally. And when Native Americans visited, they would leave weapons behind. A Massasoit would inform neighboring tribes of the peace treaty. Both leaders agreed. They shook hands and shared food. This treaty was extraordinary. It brought peace and cooperation that lasted over 50 years. Massasoit had strong reasons for peace. Disease had weakened his tribe, killing many. He faced enemies from other tribes. Alliance with the English provided protection. He also wanted to trade for their metal tools and weapons. The Pilgrims were deeply grateful. They had feared Native Americans. Instead, they gained friends and allies. This friendship proved crucial for their survival. Part 5. Spring and Summer, April-September 1621. A new season, new hope. Spring arrived with warmth and renewed hope. Snow melted. Green grass sprouted. Flowers bloomed. Birds returned from the south, filling the air with song. The stream flowed with clear, fresh water. After the long, deadly winter, spring felt like a divine gift. The Pilgrims planted their crops. They used Squanto's method for corn. They also planted beans and squash, crops the Native Americans had taught them. These 3, corn, beans, and squash, were called the 3 sisters by Native Americans because they grew well together. Corn stalks grew tall. Beans climbed the stalks. Squash spread along the ground, its large leaves suppressing weeds. They planted English crops too: wheat, barley, and peas. Some succeeded. Others did not thrive in the American soil. Everyone worked diligently. Men tended the fields. Women cooked, cleaned, and cared for children. Even children had important tasks. They weeded gardens, gathered berries, scared birds from crops, fetched water, and collected eggs from chickens. Governor John Carver made a significant change to land use. Initially, everyone worked common land and shared the harvest equally, as agreed with the London businessmen. But this system failed. Hard workers grew frustrated sharing equally with the lazy. Carver assigned each family its own plot. Families kept what they grew. Hard work meant more food. Laziness meant less. This motivated everyone. Effort increased, and crops improved. Tragically, Governor Carver died in April 1621. While working in the fields on a hot day, he developed a severe headache. A few days later, he passed away, likely from a stroke or heat stroke. The Pilgrims mourned him deeply. He had guided them through the terrible winter. They elected William Bradford as the new governor. At just 31 years old, he was wise and strong. He would lead Plymouth for most of the next 36 years. Under his leadership, the colony survived and grew. Summer of work. Summer was a time of intense activity. Crops grew tall under warm, beautiful weather. Food was abundant everywhere. Fish filled streams. Deer roamed forests. Ducks and geese flew overhead. Berries ripened on bushes. Life felt good. But the Pilgrims did not relax. They remembered the deadly winter. Another would come. They worked tirelessly to prepare. They dried fish and meat for preservation. They gathered nuts and berries. They cut firewood. They built additional houses for better shelter. They constructed a fort on the hill and moved cannons there. The fort provided defense against potential enemies. It also served as their church. Every Sunday, they gathered inside to pray and thank God. Squanto remained with them throughout the summer. He joined trading expeditions to other tribes and continued teaching survival skills. His help was priceless. The Pilgrims relied on him completely. Native Americans visited during the summer to trade. They brought furs, beaver, otter, and deer. The Pilgrims offered tools, cloth, and beads. Both sides benefited. Friendships strengthened. Fear and relief. In July, a Native American arrived with alarming news. He claimed Massasoit was dead and another tribe planned to attack Plymouth. The Pilgrims were gripped by fear. Without Massasoit's protection, they were vulnerable. They prepared for war. They loaded guns, posted guards, and prayed. A few days later, Massasoit appeared, alive and well. The report was a false rumor, possibly spread by enemies to cause chaos. Relief washed over them. Massasoit lived. Peace endured. They could continue their work in safety. Part 6. The First Thanksgiving, Fall 1621. Harvest time. September and October were harvest months. The Pilgrims worked from sunrise to sunset, cutting corn, picking beans, and gathering squash and pumpkins. Every day revealed the fruits of their labor. The harvest exceeded their wildest hopes. They had 20 acres of corn, with tall stalks producing many ears. They gathered beans, squash, barley, and peas. They had vast quantities of dried fish. They had hunted deer, turkeys, ducks, and geese. They collected baskets of nuts, walnuts, chestnuts, and acorns. They preserved berries with their small supply of sugar. Most crucially, they had enough food to last the winter. They calculated carefully. If managed wisely, they would not starve. They would not face the deaths of the previous winter. Governor Bradford surveyed the full storehouses and the 52 survivors, now healthy and strong. He reflected on all they had endured: the harrowing voyage, the deadly winter, the fear, the suffering. He thought of the 50 friends and family buried on the hill. He remembered how close they had come to total failure. Gratitude filled his heart. Despite everything, they had survived. God had blessed them. Their Native American friends had helped them. Their hard work had succeeded. Bradford decided to hold a celebration. They would have a feast of Thanksgiving. They would thank God for carrying them through hardship. They would celebrate the harvest, their survival, friendship, hope, and new beginnings. Preparing the feast. Bradford declared a 3-day celebration. Everyone began preparations. For men went hunting with muskets. They targeted birds, ducks, geese, and wild turkeys. Turkeys were abundant in the forests and larger than English birds. The hunters returned with enough to feed the colony for a week. Women and girls planned meals. They gathered vegetables from gardens and brought out dried corn and beans. They prepared to cook for days. The Pilgrims wanted to share the celebration. Bradford sent messengers to Massasoit. "We are holding a feast to celebrate our harvest. Please join us. We wish to thank you for your friendship and help." Massasoit accepted the invitation. The guests arrive. On the day of the feast, Massasoit arrived. But he did not come with just a few people. He brought 90 men. The pilgrims were stunned. They had 52 people. Now there were 142 to feed. How could they provide enough? Massasoit proved to be a generous guest. He had not come empty-handed. His 90 men went hunting and returned with 5 deer and other foods. This was not only a pilgrim feast, it was a shared celebration. Both groups contributed and provided. It became a true feast of friendship. 3 days of celebration. The feast lasted 3 full days. For 3 joyful days, pilgrims and Wampanoag ate together, talked together, and celebrated together. Historians have good estimates of the menu. They likely ate a wild turkey, duck, and geese, roasted over open fires. A venison, deer meat, roasted or made into stews. Fish and shellfish, including cod, bass, clams, mussels, and lobsters. Corn, prepared in many ways, roasted, boiled, or as cornbread. Beans and squash. Wild vegetables. Nuts, such as walnuts, chestnuts, and hickory nuts. Berries, including cranberries, blueberries, and strawberries, preserved from summer. They probably did not have pumpkin pie. They lacked ovens for baking and had very little sugar. They might have made a pumpkin dish, but not pie. Mashed potatoes were also absent. Potatoes were not yet common in North America. The women cooked for 3 days. They roasted meat over outdoor fires, made stews in large pots, and baked cornbread. The work was exhausting but filled with joy. By custom of the time, men ate first. Women served them. Later, women and children ate. Everyone ate until full, a rare experience after near starvation. Having plenty of food felt like a miracle. The celebration went beyond eating. The men held friendly contests. The English demonstrated musket shooting. The Wampanoag showed their bow and arrow skills. Both sides were impressed. They ran races and played games, competing in good spirit. At night, they sang and shared stories. The pilgrims sang hymns praising God. The Wampanoag sang their own songs. Though languages differed, music became a shared language. Children played together. Pilgrim and Native American children found ways to enjoy games despite the language barrier. Children always find a way. As the 3 days came to an end, the sun set over Plymouth Harbor. The Pilgrims and Wampanoag stood together on the hill where so many had been buried just months before. They looked at the fields now full of harvested crops and the houses that stood strong. They had come through the darkest times. Half their friends were gone, but the rest had lived. They had food, shelter, and peace. Governor Bradford gave a short speech. He thanked God for the safe trip, the new land, and the help from their native friends. Massasoit nodded and spoke through Squanto. He said his people were glad to share the land and the food. Both groups felt hope for the future. The feast was not called Thanksgiving at the time. The Pilgrims often had days to thank God. But this one was special. It showed that people from different worlds could work together and be kind. William Bradford wrote about it in his journal. Another leader, Edward Winslow, sent a letter home to England. These words are how we know the story today. Years later, more settlers came. Plymouth grew. The peace with the Wampanoag lasted a long time. In 1623, after a long dry summer, rain finally came. The Pilgrims had another thank you day with prayer and food. Other colonies did the same when good things happened. In 1789, President George Washington made the first National Day of Thanks. He wanted all Americans to thank God for the new country. But it was not every year. A woman named Sarah Josepha Hale worked for many years to make it a regular holiday. She wrote letters to presidents. Finally, in 1863, during the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln said Thanksgiving would be every year on the last Thursday in November. He hoped it would bring the country together. In 1941, Congress made it official, the fourth Thursday in November. Thanksgiving today. Americans celebrate Thanksgiving every fourth Thursday in November. A family time. People travel to gather and share a meal. Big meal, turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie. Parade. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York features giant balloons and ends with Santa. Football. Families watch or play games together. Helping others. Many donate food to those in need. Shopping. Black Friday sales begin the next day. Turkey pardon. The president spares one turkey from the table. Canada celebrates Thanksgiving on the second Monday in October. It traces back to 1578 with explorer Martin Frobisher. When we sit down to eat, we remember the Pilgrims, Squanto, and Massasoit. We think of their long journey, the harsh winter, the graves, and the full harvest. We give thanks for family, home, food, and freedom. The first Thanksgiving is more than history. It reminds us to be grateful every day. No matter the hardship, there is always something to thank for. That is the true spirit of Thanksgiving.